Well, we're into our lockdown now day, and I'm joined on Skype by Juan Watterson, the speaker, and of course, member for Rushen. I think we both had late nights, Juan, watching the events unfolding on the television from America. Maybe we should just have a quick comment on that. Could you just believe what you were seeing?
It was incredible, wasn't it? Following the events through from the Trump rally in the morning to the incitement to march on the Capitol, and the events that unfolded afterwards. It's one of those things that you never think will happen in a civilized jurisdiction, and yet there it was unfolding at the Capitol building. And it stands as a stark warning to any democracy, really, that when legislation and legislators are not even tolerated, never mind cherished, this is the outcome of an uncivilized society. It's shocking, really was shocking.
Well, you're always one for making sure things are done by the book, I know, and that's why I want to talk to you particularly. You put up you're waiting for the regulations to come through about the lockdown, and obviously you want to be certain what's going on. Have you had that information you want yet?
Yeah, we got that at 7:35 this morning, Paul. Now the task can begin of actually understanding what the lockdown means and trying to match up the ministerial statements that we've been getting over the last 2 days to what the law now says, and that's a process that's going to take a bit of time. They're not an easily digestible set of 6 documents that we need to put together and work out the meaning to. But the fact that members of Tynwald hadn't had them when lockdown came into effect, and even more concerningly, I know that the constabulary didn't have them when the lockdown came into effect, does mean that if there had been a house party last night that the police had rocked up to, they wouldn't have had the means to enforce the lockdown that we all expected, and that's a worry.
This is surely shocking to a lot of people that it's going to sort of feel like Coman's run the country single-handedly without getting any input from the rest of the members.
Well, members aren't consulted before these regulations are made anyway, so the first time we're seeing them is this morning, trying to digest them so we can advise our constituents about and answer the many questions that are coming in from them about what's in and what's out, who can turn up to work today and who can't. But to get those on the morning, it just really, I appreciate that it's not easy and there is a lot of legal work to be done and a lot of political thinking to be done. But we have had 2 days, and I know that they've done this before, so it should be easier second time around. It still remains to be seen the full ramifications of the documents we've got in front of us now.
And the Chief Minister wasn't quite sure in the press conference the other day. He was talking about emergency powers, then he said he was doing under existing powers, so there was confusion there even.
Yeah, that was an interesting detour. These are regulations that seem to be made under the Public Health Act, so these are not emergency powers. That does limit quite the scope of things that Coming can do. It does mean that they would find it harder to do things such as change speed limits and things like that. But ultimately, these are powers made under the Public Health Act for the protection of public health. So they will need sort of careful unpicking to see what they're trying to do and whether what's in the documents has actually been, matching up with what the ministerial statements have been.
And all your sessions now have gone virtual. How does that affect things?
The effects of going virtual as Tynwald, I suppose it means that no one can storm the chamber, but what it does mean is that it's a very different dynamic in the court. It's a very different place to be. It means that the President and myself and a clerk or 2 clerks will sit in the Legislative Council chamber and direct the sitting, but everyone is at home, everyone is on mute. You cannot read the room in the same way. You cannot work out when you are pushing water uphill. Because of some people's internet connections, it's all audio. We don't have the video even to sort of get the facial expressions to see whether how things are going down. And that's so important. The Tynwald chamber is a debating chamber. And to take that element away, I suppose it sterilises things to a certain extent, but it is a necessary consequence of what we need to do.
You probably understand why I've been so anti the Zoom press conferences when we didn't need to be separated, but that's another story for another day. Do you think 3 weeks is going to be... It's not something
that we do lightly, certainly, and it's certainly not something that we do lightly, because it does mean that the public can't turn up and see what we do. Of course, you can still follow it live on the radio and on the live streaming, but I do appreciate that it is not the same thing.
Do you think 3 weeks will be enough?
I'm an optimist. I really hope it is. I think the people of the Isle of Man have seen the prize that is out there to be won by a good lockdown, by a tight lockdown, and there will be a lot of people out there who will be doing their best to make sure that this is the short lockdown that we all want it to be.
I mean, this shouldn't have happened, should it? I mean, if the testing had been done as everyone was pushing, especially I think Dr. Glover was been pushing for ages on the 13th day, this potentially should never have happened in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there was an amendment in the last sitting by Mr. Hooper that would have achieved some of this that was rejected by council ministers at that time. That was an amendment I thought was sensible and I was happy to support. Whether it would have prevented the current outbreak at this time, I just don't know. Whether it was already too late by that point. It's easy to look back in hindsight, but it's important that we do learn lessons as we go along, and that's the critical thing here. There is no cast iron guarantees. This is a disease. It does not behave predictably. This is not something that 14 days will guarantee you 100% you catch all cases, and we've seen that. There are always risks involved. This is not an airtight, hermetic bubble. It is something more of a colander and a sieve. But by making good regulations, by a good testing regime, we can mitigate those risks. It's a shame that that amendment wasn't passed. I think we would have been a lot further ahead by now than we are if it had.
And putting your MHK hat on, I mean, you've already been going on social media saying if things need doing in your area, you're happy to help or look at it. Have you had much response?
Yeah, I mean, yes, in both ways, and that's been really reassuring. It's a great privilege to represent any constituency in the Isle of Man as a member of the House of Keys, and being a leader in that civic life is a job that I think we all love, because it's why we get involved. Is that willingness and desire to help people. And so whether it's vulnerable people who are worried about the mental health effects of spending 3 weeks and not seeing anybody else, whether it's somebody else who has a disability and is worried about how they're going to get food to their door, these are the sorts of things that I really want to reach out and make sure that no one's left behind in this lockdown. That's so important for every single one of our constituents, and it's good to be able to spend that bit of time just to be able to know that you're meeting their needs, and that's I say it's a great honour to do that.
Okay, well, finally, I mean, you've just got this landed on your email inbox at 7:30 this morning. So how long is it going to take you to get this all looked at and ticked off?
It'll probably take best part of the morning to try and do this. Obviously, the discussion with other backbenchers via Teams and things as well, to try and make sure that there's a common understanding of it. There's always things that can be interpreted one way or another, and so to work on that together is really important. Obviously, that's harder over chat than it is sitting around a table. But yeah, that's a process that I would have loved to have seen happen last night, so that we could have digested it and been in a far better position this morning to talk about what these regulations mean, not just receiving them now and start to digest them.
And is there anything you as a member can do? I mean, collectively, or does Coman have the power to override everything?
Well, Coman has the power to make the regulations in the first place. So whatever Coman has decided is currently now the law. Tynwald now has the opportunity to scrutinise that, and when those regulations can only last for 14 days, Tynwald now then has the opportunity at some point in that 14 days to either approve or reject or amend those regulations. And we saw that on the 30th of December when Tynwald was called, members amending the regulations. What's interesting in this case is that the 14 days takes us up to the January sitting of Tynwald, and so it looks like these regulations will be in place and stuck in place until January Tynwald, so that will be almost the full 2 weeks before we get the opportunity to debate them and to discuss them formally in Tynwald and to possibly amend them. Now, that's not to say that council ministers can't come forward with new amendments if we point out any sort of glaring deficiencies that are in them or anything like that. They can come up with a new set, but it's looking like it's going to be a long time before, in relative terms, before Tynwald gets a say on this.
And what do you think to that?
It's a product. It's a necessary product of the system. The emergency powers required that within 7 days. This is Public Health Act. It's a slightly lower standard, slightly lesser sense of emergency. And it's really about the dialogue and engagement that Council Ministers is now going to have with members where there are questions, queries and issues that arise out of this legislation, if there are any.
You said you're an optimist at the beginning. Just to finish with, do you really think 3 weeks will be enough? Or do you think this will be going on for a bit longer than that?
I think there's a really overwhelming desire on our island to make sure that this is no more than a 3-week lockdown. As I say, we have seen the prize of individual movement, of freedom, of being able to gather and hug and do all those things that are so important to us that the rest of the world hasn't been able to do. And I know that there is really a passion to get back to that as soon as possible. So I have every faith that the Manx people are going to want this to work, and it is going to be a close to a 3-week lockdown.